welcome to this episode of Talking Chaos. Today, I am Warlock Fred, and with me, as always, is the Condor. We also have two guests today, and today our topic is going to be education. Not only high school education and the established foundation that you get with education, but also we're reaching into college education and also the potential, the talk of the town lately that has been taxpayer funded education or free education.
Air quotes.
Always air quotes.
First off, we want to thank our patrons. If you want to join us on Patreon, go to patreon.com/talkingchaos. And I want to thank our cohorts for this episode, Rhodes and John C. Fremont, which is a fictional name. Let's get some background on that name there, John C. Where did you get that from?
So John C. Fremont's a figure from history. He was the first Republican candidate for president who ran on a platform of abolishing slavery. He was also a Civil War general in the Western Theater for the Union. Just what I've been fascinated with lately.
Well, that's
very nice.
It's got to be the most out there reference to a historical figure that I've heard of as of late. It's like a Franz Ferdinand reference wrapped in a Civil War reference. It's pretty beautiful. And Rhodes has been on a few episodes prior.
So we'd like to welcome Rhodes back.
What? Hi. Stuff and hi.
Stuff and hi.
Stuff and hi. I wish I was high. Wait, what?
So what we'd like to do is go around the table and what type of education has everybody had. So for me, I've been a college, I have a high school diploma. I've dropped out of college once. I'm currently enrolled in college working towards a cybersecurity degree, which is a lot of fun.
Sounds riveting, frankly.
Oh, absolutely.
Rhodes, where do you stand education-wise?
I have my high school diploma. I went to a state university, got my bachelor's of science, double majored in religion and philosophy, minored in ethics, and was going to go to law school and just never did.
Okay, so there was a plan, but you only half executed the plan.
Yeah, half.
Okay. John, what was your educational background? We all went to high school together, so I'm going to assume you have a high school diploma, right? I remember you graduating with us.
You're the only one that almost didn't graduate, Condor.
We'll get there, okay? That's not the point. We'll get there. But
So I have a bachelor's degree in history and social studies, and I'm currently pursuing my master's degree in curriculum and instruction. I'm about 2 courses away from finishing that up, 3 courses away from finishing that up. So.
And you're an educator, right, John?
Yeah, I teach 8th grade social study or U.S. history.
That's awesome. Half the reason why we brought you on this episode is because we wanted some perspective from an educator. We thought that if we were going to talk about this subject, that it was unsuitable to talk about it without somebody who at least has some mild experience in education and working in that system and learning about how it's tethered to every other system in our social sort of structure. I have a high school diploma, which I, again, through there, noticing the other people on this show, I barely obtained. I dropped out of college 3 different times. So that's got to be a record for the show, right? And I am learned, I think. So there's that. Taxpayer-funded education.
We're just going to jump right in.
Oh, we're just going to jump right to that.
Absolutely.
I was gonna say, why wouldn't we go with the high school, laying the foundation, and do we believe that high school?
Fine. You got to have order to this show that's called Talking Chaos. I don't know what the problem is here, but that's fine. We'll start slow. slow being
Put our
high
toes
school.
in the water first.
Yeah, let's dip in before we decide, do you know fucking cannonball?
Right. Okay, so pros and cons of public high school.
Our
Um,
public high school?
I mean, I didn't go to another one, so I only know about that one.
this isn't wrong. So for me, at least, I feel as though nowadays it's more about teaching for standardized, like teaching the basics for standardized tests so that like the school can get funding. Like when we were in high school, our fucking like textbooks were from like the 1970s.
80s at the very latest. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
80s
a
at the
bit of a
latest.
disappointment.
They still are.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, they still are. All right. Great.
Coming from somebody who taught in that building more recently than we were educated, I'm going to say that he probably has the knowledge of when the books were last updated.
Well, I can't speak from our collective alma mater, but in general, most schools haven't updated texts, especially as they pertain to social studies, history. You know.
And how does that make you feel as an educator?
I don't care. To be honest, the textbook manufacturers are problematic. It's all about selling curriculum to people, profiteering off of a system whose origins I don't think necessarily lie with generating profit for an industry.
Not an answer that I had anticipated, but I really like it.
I appreciate that significantly, mostly because there's not a whole lot of like, oh, well, you know, we can't afford it or whatever. It's simply a like, no, they're absolutely out this for profit.
Yeah, as he was saying that, I was like, that segment belongs on CNN. That doesn't belong on Talking Chaos. Jesus fuck. Rhodes, do you think that public education is doing the good that it's supposed to be doing? Like, we're supposed to be prepping kids for college level education, hypothetically speaking, and sort of building on all of those social things that you're supposed to be learning, the social cues that you're supposed to be learning from junior high and high school. Is it doing its job?
No. And like a short answer, I don't believe so. From what I've seen, like nowadays, I spent a time living in an urban city down south for about 4.5 years, and what I saw was a lot of schools turning to not public but for-profit charter schools. And there's just some things, in my personal opinion, that should not be for-profit, and I think education is one of them.
John C., what are your thoughts on private schooling versus public schooling? Which one do you think is doing a better good for the society we live in?
Well, I think the role of public schools has certainly changed over the years. And I mean, it is even to this extent when we were all attending school. But instead of preparing kids for their futures, which I have to say, I do think schools attempt to do, I think the job of educators has shifted to include more of a counselor role, and in some cases, a parental role.
Out of necessity.
Which
yeah.
Out of necessity, yeah. So it's kind of unfortunate and potentially, I guess, deprives students who may not need those social and economic supports of the education that might be seen as more beneficial to their futures, more preparatory for future learning or something of that order.
Okay, round the table. What would you change about public schooling on a high school level? Fred?
I'd get rid of standardized testing, or at least remove it in the regard of like it holds as much weight as it does. Like for me, I feel like it's more that you need to actually be able to have the like teaching the students. I understand that there has to be some sort of like measurement of how you're teaching the students, but like, for example, I had a friend out at one of the stations I was at, or my last station, and which was in New Mexico, and they were actually like told we're forced essentially to push students forward, like students who were going from the second to the third grade and could not read.
You know what?
Yeah, I know that I failed 7th grade. And my mother sat down with the counselors and they said, we can hold him back, but it's only at your request.
That's because retention is shown to decrease the likelihood of graduating, getting a diploma.
Makes sense.
So there's a lot of research tied up in that, and schools are actually at risk of losing funding if
They hold students
they have
back.
a lower graduation rate.
Right.
And yeah, holding students back, it's kind of a tricky thing. Definitely a lot of, I guess, identity politics wrapped up into that.
I mean, there's no getting away from politics in our modern culture, it seems.
Especially not in education. I mean, it's a public institution.
That's driven by legislation. So naturally, politics is going to be a part of it.
Taxpayer money.
Rhodes, what do you have for changes to the public school system? Ideas,
Super
suggestions?
simple, because I agree with Fred on the standardized testing. I think that we put way too much emphasis on it, and it doesn't really teach real world skills. I think just absolutely simple, bring back some classes like they used to have. I think that driver's training should be free and a class in high school, and I think that hands down, just something super simple. I think we should have some real life like experience classes that are mandatory to take, because I know
bring back home ec. Bring back how to balance a checkbook.
Thank you. Like I had to show a kid how to fucking sign a check at work the other day. Like I was like, "Are you serious? Like you don't know how to write a check?" And then same person though. I gave her my credit card one day, or she saw my credit card one day, and she's like, "This is the ugliest effing credit card I've ever seen. It's a cassette tape. I have a cassette tape. Like my Discover card looks like a cassette tape." And I was just like, "Oh my god!"
Such a product of the '90s.
Anyway, yeah. So like, just real life skills courses. I think that especially driver's training.
Well, that would be really interesting, because over the course of an entire semester, you could teach a lot more than just the training of how to be a driver. You could teach how to check your oil, how to check your windshield. These are basic functional car maintenance things that everybody should know how to do, that I am only like half good at. All right. I'm 30 years old. Not good. I don't think I've ever changed a tire. I just call AAA. Like, hey, you guys, come out here, help me out.
Jesus.
I'll wait 2 hours so that I don't have to do this. That's fine.
That's sad. Anyway.
That is sad.
Public school, bitches.
I'm afraid I'm gonna have to get on my soapbox a little bit here.
Oh, do it.
And
do it.
Disagree with you guys. Okay. So, I get it, the trades education, but more importantly, the life skills education that people would like to see come back. I just wonder, a lot of people that advocate for this, the same people that would like to see less government involvement with education. And I wonder if it might be more beneficial for those people to take the time out of their daily lives to teach their children how to do those things. I mean, so much of that used to be a part of people's informal education outside of school. And it kind of feels like society shifted, our economy shifted to where so many people are working that they don't actually take the time to parent, and that responsibility has been shifted into the academy.
Well, I think if I may, like real quick, like it feels like I understand where you're coming from. I absolutely to an extent I agree. However, if it was something that was already a part of the academy back in the day, and then something shifted to where it was forced upon the parents instead, like where now you had, like, as you said, with economic differences and everything like that, you have parents that, are working 2, maybe 3 jobs in order to make ends meet. Like they're not having those, they're not able to trade off or hand off those life skills to their children.
Right. There's no free time. There are situations where there's just no free time.
I can certainly empathize with that. It's more an issue of principle,
No, I'm with you, and it brings me. Go ahead.
I definitely get it, but like my mom, she learned how to balance a checkbook in school. She took driver's training as part of her high school education.
Yeah, my mom did too.
Cooking classes as part of her high school education, whereas like nowadays, kids are so like pressured to do like AP classes and get as many advanced honor classes in as possible, and instead of requiring these life skill courses that actually our parents did take, like, yes, they did have their parents actually parent them because, people don't parent their kids anymore. I definitely agree with that. But they also did have these classes available to them and encouraged for them to take because they had much less credits that they needed or they were required to take to actually graduate. So they were able to take these various courses that actually taught them different life skills.
Oh, sure. Historically, I mean, that really wasn't the case. The advent of that sort of education, the home economics, all that came with the baby boom, post World War II economy, a United States that saw a government that wanted to legislate a bigger, better, brighter future for the people, the citizens, I guess.
Right. This seemed like it was a product of the age of empowerment in the last century or so. That 10 or 15-year period where we did nothing but put money into infrastructure and education, and we seem to just take advantage of our economic stability as a country, and so everything got better.
I'll stay off my soapbox on the economic stability during that period of time.
John brought up there's a certain level of home education that's a responsibility to parents. Bottom line, there's no getting around it. Is homeschooling a better alternative route to public schooling? I find myself asking this question as a parent with a child that's 3 years old. And one of the reasons why I find myself asking this, even though I loved my public schooling experience, I got hazed, I hazed other people. It was part of the process and I loved it. And, but I saw this.
Yeah, you don't get that at home. I mean, mom's not hazing you.
Yeah. It's not the same when dad gives you a wedgie. But I saw this story about a 15-year-old kid, okay? And some of you may remember this story, but it was an internet puzzle called Cicada 3301. It was a series of encrypted puzzles that led to more puzzles that now has led them to a 58-page codex that they can't
decipher,
unencrypt. Yeah, so one of the first puzzles was solved by a 15-year-old kid out of rural West Virginia who was homeschooled.
Okay. So we're going based solely off education, because with homeschooling, I understand it to the extent of you're able to provide a individualized curriculum for that specific child. However, I feel like they're stunted in their social aspect of you're not getting the interaction with your peers, you're not getting the interaction with the people the people your age. For example, I grew up you got, other than John, you guys know where I grew up, out in the fucking sticks, middle of nowhere. The only people I had for interaction were my siblings, and so I was socially awkward as fuck. I mean, to a point, I still am.
I was gonna say, was their friend anyway?
Rhodes taking some heavy hits at Fred right now. I would argue that the society that children are growing up in right now is already socially stunting them. So why sacrifice what could be a better education for the sake of social norms when you know that this tech-focused society that we live in right now is already doing social damage?
One thing that has to, for me, is kind of the elephant in the room. The people teaching homeschool aren't qualified educators. They're not necessarily going to provide their students with the same quality education that someone that has, thousands of hours of training,
that's the kind
experience,
of point,
and really content knowledge would be the big one.
That's one of the greatest points that I'm so glad that I brought an educator on to make that I wouldn't have thought of.
Well, have you seen? I mean, sorry to make a pop culture reference.
No, we're over it. Go with it.
Okay, but Jesus Camp, there's people that are homeschooling their kids that are obviously not qualified, and there's I mean, you get those memes on Facebook all the time where like people are like, "Oh yeah, I homeschool my kid," and they like misspell everything in the goddamn post. I think that I agree with John, like that some people shouldn't be able to homeschool their kids. I guess you should have to follow a specific curriculum.
Or at least take a test to determine your eligibility.
Because even then you can study for a test to be like, depending on like what the specifics of that test are. Like, I feel like there's a like for example, John is a history person. Like, we also have science and we also have math, and we also, like we have to diversify. And so not everybody's going to be the best in, like, you can't have somebody who's one person being a general educator in the regard of, hey, I know all these things. Like, I mean, I know for primary school, or at least, for us, at least up to, I think, 6th grade, it was all, we had one teacher essentially to teach us everything.
Mm-hmm.
And those folks have 3 minors in various subjects, but yeah, most of them are not experts in their content areas.
Right, but in an elementary school or primary school level, you almost don't expect them to be. Like, it's not like you're getting into quantum mechanics at that
No, they're
level.
like psychological experts. They understand the development of people, and what I guess what it takes for them to reach a place where they can learn. I mean, so much of it's about grooming kids for future education.
Okay, so right now, my daughter, 3 years old, it goes to a preschool because she's young. But because of the availability of preschool and some of the problems with like the cultural area of where she lives, the only affordable preschool is being run by a religious organization.
That's the case often.
So one of the drawbacks, at least in my opinion, this is a drawback to the fact that my daughter is getting a very good education, is that right now she's also being taught to love Jesus.
So you're trading your daughter's education for her soul, is what you're saying.
No, Jesus is trading it for her soul.
Oh, okay, there you go.
yeah. It's like they made this sounds unusually close to Deals with the Devil. I want to make that abundantly clear, but there's definitely something happened. I was not consulted, but she's really smart, so I have very little to be angry about. And it's adorable when she starts singing about Jesus. A part of me is like, this is really culty, but it's adorable.
But I think you're touching on something that's problematic for me, which is the idea that privatization actually limits freedoms when it comes to education. I mean, access to an unbiased, scientific education that considers all possibilities. Someone's not necessarily going to get that by going to the private sector, because
the private sector is able to do whatever they want with it.
Yes, they don't have the regulation. They don't have the things handcuffing them, so to speak. But also, I think oftentimes there's not a lot of money to be made in education. So these people that are going into it, they're starting private schools. I mean, there's an ulterior motive, sending a certain message out to the public to kind of ruminate and catch on.
Okay.
I know that we said that we weren't going to be mentioning politicians, but technically the person that I'm bringing up is a public figure. They were appointed to their position. They did not run. And I think they're relevant to what we're talking about. And right now that's the Secretary of Education in this country.
Fucking the bosses.
I feel like she's a boogeyman. I don't know. I mean, what has she done? She's been kind of ineffectual.
Well, she's been...
And the deregulation that's happening is bothersome to me. Like, there are elements of what she's trying to do that are raising public education to a higher level than public education. And that's shitty.
Yeah, I don't think it's a partisan thing, I guess, is what I would say. I mean, both sides of the aisle are guilty of deregulating, of trying to push their beliefs and emphasize certain things they believe in. I mean, the charter school with bipartisan support.
Absolutely, but if you look at Grand Rapids' social structure and what the DeVosses have done to that city and the area around the city of their actual school systems, as just a prime example, and then that they've spread their influence across Michigan, and now she has that as a fucking pulpit as the Secretary of, or I'm sorry, yeah, the Secretary of Education. She literally has done everything in her power to privatize schools so that way they are for profit. That way they can suck taxpayer dollars for profit schools.
Oh, sure. I'm not
there's
defending
some-
the boss.
Okay.
I mean,
I don't think anybody would right now. She's pissing a lot of people off, regardless of your political affiliations.
I guess it's just important to recognize that previous administrations were operating with similar philosophies on education and really pushing for public school vouchers and trying to essentially legislate an environment where charter schools could kind of come to have a greater standing. I mean, this occurred with Arne Duncan, the previous Secretary of Education, and really has been going on for the past 30 years.
God, John, I'm so glad that you came on as a guest. Like, I'm really, really happy. Rhodes, nothing against you. We love having you on this show. We're so happy that you could return. But John is allowing for some insight that I didn't have previous to this episode. And I'm learning things that I hope the audience is learning that I am a little blown away by.
I'll agree with that as
We're
well.
gonna-
Like, there are a lot of things that he said that, like, I mean, really the general discussion here has been educational in a general sense. Like, I've learned things that I wouldn't have known otherwise.
So if you guys don't
this
mind,
has been-
I'd like to ask a question that I think is relevant to this whole thing, and it is kind of the issue that underpins it all, which is education constitutionally is supposed to reside at the state level. It's supposed to be controlled by state governments, and the federal government, since the 70s, the advent of the Department of Education has increasingly grown its role in managing all that. I mean, do you guys agree with that? Is it something that should be federal, or is it better left at the state level?
If I may go first, I guess. I suppose that, like, I feel as though, like, if at a federal level, it's easier to provide a curriculum. Like, I'm saying, like, as curriculum based. I'm not saying as far as like privatized versus public or anything like that. At a curriculum based,
Sorry to interrupt. Just really quick, curriculum's still at the state level
okay.
right now. Yeah.
So, and I guess my problem with that is you have states, for example, like Kentucky or Mississippi, or, you know, the states that are like okay with it, like dinosaurs don't exist and like Jesus and like bringing religion into public schools.
Shots fired.
I'm sorry, I don't like separation of church and state. Like, if you want to actually have it, like, if you want to have the education have like Jesus in it, you need to start paying taxes. That's my opinion. But like, as far as like as a curriculum goes, they need to have it at more of a federal level so that it's a standardization across the nation for like, this is what everybody's learning. And I know that doesn't make sense with the whole, like, I don't believe in standardized testing. But it's more the, like, provided that the curriculum is correct, like, you know, is actually set up correctly. Condor, you're raising your hand. Go.
Well, because I have something that I think is really relevant to say. I think of education as like food or water. It's a necessity to being alive. I think that education is like a constitutional right in this country. I understand that it isn't specifically outlined like that in any in the Bill of Rights or any
I
other
assume
amendment.
that you're talking about
but-
like primary and secondary school, like up till high school as education.
Right now, it's publicly funded, so we've all agreed that it's a right that everybody should have. Okay? If that's the case, then in these areas where education has taken a nosedive, it should be treated like an emergency.
But
And there should be a declaration of disaster called on by the federal government at that point.
But
Other than that, I have no problem with the states regulating their own education system as long as it's not in a state of disaster or disarray.
Yeah, but I mean, what you're saying is, you know, the government should be able to intervene into school districts, which are local entities. You know, school boards are locally elected, and the poster child for that, to me, is Detroit. I mean, they had an emergency manager not just appointed for the city, but also for their school district, and it ended up creating much larger problems, to be honest.
Did it create the problems or spotlight other problems that already existed?
To an extent, I think they created some of them with greater budget cuts, you know, not offering teachers the right incentive to come work in their district, by not maintaining facilities to the point where, you know, I think one school had issues with being rat infested, with leaking ceilings, with plaster falling on kids while they were working. At one point, they moved all of the students into the gymnasium for several months because the rest of the school was unsafe.
Jesus.
Yeah, I don't understand how you can continue to educate people in an environment like that. If it was a house, it would have been declared
Condemned.
unfit.
So if
Yeah,
I may,
yeah.
real quick, like the standardized. Sorry, I know I'm talking over you, Road.
You jumped. No, anyway, go Ted.
The thing I was going to say is the, like, what Condor was saying with the, like, funding and, like, standardized testing is essentially what's running the funding. So students that score highly, from my understanding, are getting the better, like, they're getting the more funding, they're getting the better education, when in reality what you want to do.
The districts
Yeah,
with
okay,
the students
the
that are
districts
scoring
are
the
getting-
best
yeah.
are getting the best education.
In reality, what you want is the exact opposite. The students that are actually performing poorly, you want to put your money there so that you're actually bringing the education up to the standardized level that is already, like, that you want to have. And yes, I know, Rhodes, you're giving me the preach look.
Rhodes, what do you
Well,
got?
I mean, I've spoken on this before. I have a really unsure relationship with how I feel with the with states' rights in the Constitution. Now, in this day and age, so with what Fred was saying, I think that the federal government should be funding school systems, because what we have now is schools that are in very shitty areas like Detroit, like John said, that they don't have the taxpayer money to actually fund those schools. So when you put an emergency manager in, they're just trying to balance the budget. Whereas you have these schools that are fucking 30, 45 minutes away that have state-of-the-art institutions because their parents work in the city but drive out, to the suburbs, and that's where their tax money is spent. And when I lived in St. Louis, I lived in a really bad area for the first year I lived down there. And there was a school right down the road from where I lived that some of the kids in my apartment complex went to. That was behind a liquor store, a nail salon, and a place you can buy weaves. It was a little strip mall. You literally could buy liquor right outside of the school.
Damn.
That was what was in front of it. But when I moved, when I moved into to a nicer part of the city, the schools around there were like gorgeous. You know what I mean? Because the taxpayer dollar could be spent there. But since we have it, separation of church and state, and then, I'm sorry, not Jesus, sorry. We have states' rights, and we have curriculum, and everything's paid for by the state and by the individual community. We are causing those with less to already be disadvantaged because they can't even get the proper education.
So, I mean, do we need tax reform?
John,
because when you're looking at those schools, the more affluent communities, they're paid for by property taxes, by millages, by local taxes, as opposed to anything at the state level. States provide funding for students.
yeah, the locals have gotten together and decided that they wanted to invest their money in the educational system, as opposed to people who have
don't have any money to invest in the educational system.
Right. Exactly. Go ahead, John, with what you were saying.
Oh, that was my point for the most part. It's really just an issue of, I mean, all these problems are symptoms of a much greater
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
illness, I guess, in our society.
I agree.
100.
I mean, my personal opinion is taxation is theft, but I mean, everybody does their own thing.
Well, I mean, if we were fucking in the Wild West, I would be totally down with you, Fred. Like, yeah, taxation is theft. I'm gonna go fucking kill my own dinner. This is my land. I'm taking care of it. But you're driving on public roads that are taken care for by tax dollars.
If I may, no. If I may,
you are using cell phone. You're using Wi-Fi that was using grants by taxpayer money. Like what? Like you can't separate those things in this day and age.
No, I know that. Like for me, it's tax reform. Like for me, it's not necessarily. I would like to. My personal objective would be, and I know this is way the fuck off topic, but I like it.
This is for another episode at another time.
Fine. Tax reform.
Come on, chaos, man.
Hey, it is definitely, dude. We are hell bent on chaos here. We are gonna call an end to the trimmed portion of this episode. If you guys want to listen to the rest of what we four have to say on the topic of education, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/talkingchaos. Look for the episode that involves education. Look for the full bush. It's going to cost you at least $10 a month, but based on this conversation so far, I think it's worth it. Come check it out.